So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session. My name's David Ambrose with Informa Software. I have Steve Braswell here with me as well, and we're going to talk about customized business processes with DocuSign APIs. So how to create a seamless integration for an optimized user experience. And I've been informed that we have exactly 42 minutes, at which point we'll be played off the stage. So let's jump right in. So a little bit briefly about introduction, what we're going to cover in this session. So the focus is really on the sort of solutions that can be accomplished when you are developing at the API level with the DocuSign API. It's not a session on how to use DocuSign APIs. There are plenty of other sessions on that in the conference, but this is going to be more of an inspirational discussion about where we have used API level integration to develop those sort of seamless end-to-end business solutions. So we're going to talk about three specific solutions today. One is our eDocs platform for timeshare and commercial lending. And really, it is sort of an end-to-end experience from the point of sale signing all the way through the securitization of digital financial assets. We'll also go over our DocGen solution, which is an application we built for high volume intelligent document assembly, leveraging the CLM APIs and platform. And then time permitting, we'll go into a little bit about Forms Integrator, which is another integration of CLM functionality, but into a third-party eForm and portal solution. So just really quickly about Informa Software, we've been around for about 25 years, focuses on our own enterprise software solutions. We also do solution integration with professional services and custom software solution for our clients. We are a DocuSign Platinum partner as well as a Microsoft Gold partner. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he's going to talk to you about the eDocs solution.
Great, thanks, Dave. So we'll start with the context here. Our customers are involved in a couple of industries, the timeshare industry and the consumer financial services industry. And they came to us with a problem statement about their contracting process. It's very paper-based and high volume. And they wanted to completely digitize that from the point of sale all the way through to the actual securitization of those assets. So they came to us looking for a solution like that, and using the DocuSign APIs, e-signature platform APIs, we were able to build a solution that gave them the goals they were looking for. They wanted a flexible, easy-to-use signing experience for their agents and the customers. They wanted fully digital assets to be used as collateral and securitization. That was a primary corporate objective for them. In real estate terms, they wanted electronic recording of those real estate transaction documents, so they didn't have to convert an electronic signed document to paper for the recording. And on the back end, managing the securitization vaults for the warehouse lending and borrowing processes. So once these documents are digitally signed, they go into a digital vault where they can perform those operations around the securitization and selling of those assets and borrowing against them. And then finally, they also wanted this to encompass the converting of paper contracts to digital assets where a digital closing wasn't practical or effective or allowed by the jurisdiction, that they wanted those to be converted to a digital asset where possible. So our solution for them covered all of those aspects. So next, we can look at just a high-level solution overview. So again, this is Informa's cloud-based digital contract execution solution. So it enables the customers to close their contracts with their customers in a highly personal, it's a very interactive experience, buying a timeshare and closing on a personal finance loan. The solution's hosted in Microsoft Azure Cloud. We leverage the DocuSign e-signature API. For greatest flexibility of the document templates that our customers use, we're using a hidden anchor string text for the dynamic tab placement. So we have created our own syntax for that to control the placement of signature controls. We use embedded signers. So the identity of the signers is known by our eDocs application and verified by our customer through the in-person exchange of information. They are not using a out-of-the-box DocuSign signing experience and DocuSign user account. They're using embedded signers. We take advantage of the redirect URL for post-signing processing for the signing complete events. We utilize envelope custom fields to perform some integrations with eOriginal, the digital vault on the back end, as well as some of the other data that our customers wanted stored on their envelopes. As I mentioned, integration with the eOriginal digital vault. And then sort of the primary end user focused objective was to provide a very fluid and analogous to signing paper experience that the customers could get. So we have a very orchestrated in-person signing experience that encompasses multiple envelopes getting signed in parallel by all of the participating parties. And we'll see some screenshots and description of that here in a moment. As I mentioned, we integrate with the property recording agencies, and we're looking at the integration with remote online notarization as well to add to the solution set. So next we can take a look at just the overall solution components and how they work together. So the presentation experience, as I mentioned, highly orchestrated, very personal closing process where the point of sale experience is coordinated by the closing officer, the person who is actually working with the customer to close the loan, whether it be timeshare or personal finance. Again, parallel signing with multiple buyers, that was the key tenet of the user experience solution design. And the notarization and witnessing roles are applied through that in-person experience. Given COVID and other factors, the ability to remote close was very important. So we've enabled the customers to sign these documents remotely in a very similar, highly orchestrated and controlled environment where the closing officer is still directing what's happening. And behind the scenes, we're integrating with the DocuSign signing experience for those documents where possible, they can be signed without the customer having to come into the location to do that signing. On the back end, all the eDocs services are hosted in Azure. So the core infrastructure there, that's the DocuSign eOriginal integration point where we call the APIs, the messaging and queuing infrastructure, Azure Functions, all the nuts and bolts that make the system work. The workflow management for the back office processes where certain processes are required by the corporate office after a closing has taken place. Again, there's dozens of timeshare sales centers across the country, and our consumer financial services customer has hundreds of branches across the country where these closings take place, and their central back-end processes are facilitated through our eDocs services as well. E-recording services exist there, and then the e-vaulting services are all integrated through that set of services. In addition to eDocs, we mentioned the DocGen solution. This is the Informa DocGen solution utilizing the DocuSign CLM platform, tightly integrated with eDocs. We'll talk more about that in a bit, and allows for a complete end-to-end experience for our customers to automatically generate all of the appropriate documents, send them directly into the eDocs environment, execute them, and then manage the back-end processes once they're done. As value-add services, we've also created some additional capabilities on top of eDocs, not necessarily using the DocuSign APIs, but just to give our customers added value. We call them Securities Analyzer, eProposal, and ID Scan, and they provide the customer with, now that they have all these digital assets, they're just some additional value-add services that we've provided to them on top of our eDocs platform. So next, we'll just take a quick look at specifically the multi-party signing experience. So what you're seeing here is the eDocs presenter experience. This is an application. It's a native application for Windows for a very robust and interactive, intuitive user experience. The presenter, which is the closing officer, will control the signing experience and show the documents to the customer. They're sitting at a table together across from each other, and the presenter has this tablet in their hands, and the buyers each have their own tablets in their hands. They just show the person's name because they're waiting for a document to sign. So once we see the next slide, you'll see what the presenter is seeing plus what the buyers are seeing. So buyer 1 and buyer 2 over there are waiting for contracts documents to come their way. And while the presenter is discussing with them the terms of the agreement, making sure they understand this document, what they're seeing in the presenter app is a representation of the document that once the presenter clicks the begin signing button, that will release this document to the buyer tablets, take them into the DocuSign signing experience for that document. Again, we're using embedded signers, so things like the get recipient view URL for particular recipients. We're messaging that out to those connected tablets. They are able to sign. If, for example, this was husband and wife, they're able to sign in parallel. They can both have their own review experience to see the document, go through the DocuSign experience, apply their signature. And on the presenter's device, you can see we're using some statusing where real-time information can come back once the buyer has signed the document. We process that redirect URL for the post-signing event, and we use SignalR, which is a real-time communication platform where we can update the status on the presenter as the buyers finish their signing. So that's just a taste of what that fully embedded signing and integrated parallel signing process looks like for eDocs. So next we can kind of talk about, well, what is the impact that this solution has had on the customers that are using it. So one is shortened time to close. It's much more efficient. You've got a fully digital experience, so they're able to go through the documents more quickly. The signing process is done more quickly because they're able to go through the DocuSign signing experience and apply their signature with just a tap of the yellow tab. So it's much more efficient for them to close. Increased customer satisfaction with the closing process, so they feel like it's more secure, it's more intuitive, it's more modern, feels safer. And a tangible example of that is we've had our customers report that with the use of our eDocs platform, specifically in timeshare, they have reduced the percentage of deals that get to the closing table but then fall apart at the table. They call that walkaways, where customers have gotten all the way to the point of sitting down with the customers to sign the documents, and something causes that deal to not come to fruition. Just by using eDocs, they've reduced that percentage of walkouts. Reduced cost of asset management. They're not dealing with paper documents anymore, which can be costly to store and transport and secure. A reduced rate of errors, so they're not having to follow as many checklists. They know that the document has all the signatures that are needed because DocuSign's platform enforces that. So there's a lot higher success rate on the documents that come through. They don't need any further review or corrections to be made. It's much more efficient there with less errors. They've pushed through across our clients over 3 million envelopes a year. So a very high volume environment for these customers. And reduced costs of due diligence for asset securitization and sale. So through the use of eDocs, the due diligence that is done by a third party to make sure that the loans that are being sold are correct and are valid is reduced because they're using a digital platform to perform all of that due diligence. And we've enabled our customers to sell mortgage-backed securities containing over 95% digital assets in a very short order once they rolled out eDocs to all of their locations. And then just to close on the eDocs project, this solution, some of the challenges that we had to work through and overcome with the timeshare environment, it was very important that the customer's experience be very positive throughout the process, even at the closing table. So if they're going to need corrections to documents while they get to the signing table and they're ready to sign and they're wanting to change the terms of the contract, maybe they're financing, they want to adjust something, or they would rather put the purchase in the name of a trust instead of their individual names. Modifying those documents is difficult if you're putting them all in the same envelope and you're partially signing that envelope. It's difficult to change the contents of that envelope once it's been sent and signing has begun. So we've created an architecture where we utilize multiple envelopes for the same contract, and that enables us to switch out documents within the contract set because they're in separate envelopes. Next, the recipient identity assigned after the envelope was sent. So we do use like a witness role. The identity of that witness is not known when we create the envelope. So we do create a placeholder recipient when that envelope is created. And we use the API for a recipient put. API call. Once that identity is known and that witness has signed up to witness that contract, we will then attach them to that envelope, the set of envelopes, by using the recipient put, by updating the placeholder to the now known identity of that signer. Implementation of the anchor string I mentioned before. We've designed our own syntax that allows our customers flexibility in tagging their documents so that the signatures land in the right places, the date signed, that it supports checkboxes and radio box, different input controls through the form of this anchor string syntax, so they can easily adjust their templates without us having to make any changes. And that is all supported with hidden text through the DocuSign API. And finally, we introduced integration of eOriginal through custom envelope fields that allow us to send multiple envelopes to DocuSign that all get vaulted into the same eOriginal transaction on the back end. So custom envelope fields was another area of the DocuSign API that we used there. And I think,
okay.
And now we'll hand it back over to Dave for some discussion on DocGen.
Thanks, Steve. So as we mentioned, DocGen is our document generation platform for the intelligent assembly of documents. And it really drove out of the eDocs platform, because as you can imagine, the eDocs needs to consume these digital documents and they need to be generated. So start off in the timeshare industry, where there are literally thousands of documents, of different types of documents that need to be produced as part of their business processes, particularly as they're selling different types of inventory. Some of those are real estate transactions, some are trust agreements. So there's just a lot of different documents that need to be produced as part of that. Many of those, if not most of them, need to be regularly updated to stay in compliance with federal and state and sometimes municipal regulations, as well as supporting new product offerings. So when we first started looking at this, the majority of the systems that are in use today are primarily homegrown solutions, and they are notoriously difficult to maintain, and they rely on IT involvement for any changes. So it increases the IT backlog and the ability to deliver timely updates. One of the ways around that is they would start creating multiple duplicate versions of these document templates, which further exacerbates the maintenance problems. So also, many of those require an approval process for legally required updates. So many of these customers have external legal counsel that need to review those documents. So we are able to leverage the review and approval steps and the external reviewer inside the CLM application to support that. And as Steve mentioned, this is a very orchestrated closing process, certainly in the timeshare business. So those documents, once the customer has agreed to make their purchase, those documents need to be generated and presented electronically on the eDocs platform as quickly as possible. And sometimes there are up to 30 documents that need to be generated. And the goal was to get those from the point where they request the document to be generated to the point where it's available in eDocs to be in the 2 to 3 minute range. So again, the solution overview for DocGen, it leverages both the CLM API as well as the native CLM platform capabilities. The approval process for templates is entirely within the CLM workflow space. It's not as time intensive, but the other parts are handled through direct calls to the CLM API. One of the things that we identified early on was the complexity of what we call rationalizing the documents down from the thousands to into the hundreds, or less than 100 document templates, was the logic around the intelligent assembly. And so we actually implemented our forward chaining rules engine to determine the templates that need to be produced for a given deal, any clauses that need to be merged into those templates based on the characteristics of the deal, if those documents need to be combined together, as well as we use it to set conditional merge tags that are then read by the DocuSign CLM XML merge task to actually generate the documents. really focusing on the performance and high volume processing. So as Steve mentioned, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of sites across the US, and as we roll it out internationally, that will all be performing the same sort of activities with the sale of their timeshares. And those documents need to be generated still. The solution needs to be scalable across all of those environments. So a lot of leveraging of the scale up and scale out capabilities of Azure, particularly using serverless functions. So all of our API interaction with CLM, with the CLM API, is through those serverless functions, so we can scale them as much as we need. We'll talk about some of the limitations of that shortly when we talk about some of the lessons learned from doing this. One of the things that we also did, again, leveraging some of the API capabilities and the sort of that seamless integration that we strive for, was extending some of the functionality that CLM provides around their document merge capabilities. There is currently no support for a generating of a barcode, and there are certain situations where documents need to be mailed out and then be received and need to be scanned back in to be digitized. And they require a barcode of certain embedded information. So that embedded information, again, is determined by a business rule. However, the production of that barcode image and placing it onto the DocuSign template was not supported natively by CLM. So we extended the functionality there. Image size, if you've used an image merge tag in the CLM template, you notice that it is in units of inches, so it does not support fractional inches. So we actually developed our own merge syntax for images to support using different sizes of images. Also, again, for monitoring the throughput of the application, we enhanced some of the monitoring capabilities, again, through calls to the CLM API, so that we can have a little finer control over what stages each of those document generation requests is in and the time it's taking to do that. So you mentioned that eDocs is on the back end for this. So this is, you can go from the point where you're requesting a set of documents to be generated, it goes through the business rules, goes through an ETL to retrieve the data from the customer system, generates the documents and flows it right through the eDocs without any human intervention. So straight through processing. And interesting in that case, there is no actual interaction between the end user requesting those documents and the CLM platform. It's all handled through the API integration. It is actually much more than just a technical solution. So as you can imagine, going from several thousand documents to several hundred documents, there's an entire methodology and analysis process that goes into determining how those templates can be rationalized into a smaller number and what sort of business logic you need to put in to determine what can be turned into a clause, what can be a conditional element, and then having that manifested through the business rules engine passed into the API so those documents are generated as expected. If we look at a high level the solution overview, it's broken really into four main areas. We have a customer environment, and that's where the data resides that ultimately gets merged into the documents. There's two main calls into the customer environment. One is to get the characteristics of the account or the transaction that we're doing. That gets fed into the rules engine. The rules engine then determines which documents need to be produced, and it makes a call back through an ETL service, a customer-specific ETL service, to retrieve that data in a format that's dictated by our solution. It retrieves it in an XML format that is then run into the CLM API orchestrated to our DocGen services. Inside the CLM portion of the solution, we have the template approval workflow. So all of the workflow, all the templates get moved into a production-ready folder only through a template approval process. So we don't allow individuals to update the templates directly. They put them into a staging folder, and then it goes through that typical CLM approval process dictated by client-specific requirements. But ultimately, once that is approved, then it is put into the production environment, and only then is it available for being generated. through the CLM API is how we manage retrieving data from the templates. We cache a lot of this information, again, for performance reasons. So templates are read from the template folder. The clause libraries are also cached and read and cached in Redis cache inside of Azure for performance reasons. Output folders obviously have to remain inside of CLM, but we also have some temporary Azure storage for some of the functionality that we have to implement outside of the API, outside of the CLM environment. And we leverage the smart rules functionalities particularly for changes to templates and changes to clauses. So the smart rules actually make calls back to our DocGen API to indicate if a folder or if a template or clause library has been updated, at which point we make a call back through the CLM API to pull that revised data back and stick it into our Redis cache, again, for the next document generation request. There's a UI, a progressive web app, if anyone's interested, that manages the whole user experience from the request all the way through the business rules maintenance and any of the administrative and monitoring functions. And we'll take a quick look at that inside of the demo. And all of the rest of the solution obviously runs inside of Microsoft Azure. So that's where our rules engine executes. All the notifications, again, through a SignalR real-time messaging is handled there. All the caching, barcode generation, some other functions and capabilities we'll talk about in a second. And then, yeah, we leverage the Azure functions for the orchestration of that document generation process, as well as some of the data extraction and leveraging that for parallel processing. You'll see when we run a document request through the parallel processing. This isn't going to be a discussion on forward chaining rules engines, but we'll talk a little briefly about why business rules and how they interact or they drive the interaction with the CLM API. So the rule here basically says if you're working with this vacation occupancy document and you're running it for location 20, and nature of a forward chaining rules engine is there are business rules prior to this one being executed that would have determined these values. But in this case, we are going to use the clause from this clause library, so from the term library, the vacation accommodations. The option value that we're going to use, so the term inside of that library is going to be this one, and we're going to stick it into the vacation accommodations merge tag. So this merge tag is going to be on the template associated with this document. And so that's how we know that we're going to be populating which merge value into that merge tag. We also support the use of DocuSign merge tags inside of the clause library itself. So in order to, again, reduce the number of templates, we can put DocuSign merge tags inside of the clause library. And so this second merge tag merge required flag indicates that after we do the initial merge to take the clause library data and put it into the document, now we'll have a set of text in there that actually contains DocuSign merge tags. So we have to run that merge process through a second time. Some notifications, so we can see which documents were generated, how long it took to be generated. And we'll actually see that inside of the demo. So let me just quickly just define quickly. So this is the DocGen solution here. I'll just clear out a previous one. So as I mentioned, inside of the business rules, so again, we'll look at this conditional element one. It's fairly straightforward. So again, there would be rules that execute prior to this, but in this case, for this particular document, if the product we're working with is a VOA, is the name of the product for this particular customer, then for that document, we are going to actually set a conditional element. So this conditional element translates into an XML merge tag, and this is used inside of the template as a conditional merge tag. So when the value is VOA, then we're going to hide or display certain pieces of that document template. And let me just quick go back here and show this in operation. So user comes in here, enters an account number, hits the create. This goes out to an ETL, and this is a QA environment, so it's using some lower powered functions to do this, but it's gone out, retrieved the data from the customer system, run through the business rules, and identified the list of documents that can be produced. In this case, we're going to produce this eDocs demo set. We don't have time to run it through the eDocs and show the signing experience, but what we'll do is we'll preview it, and we'll just click on Save and Generate. So what it's doing now is it's going to go out to the ETL and grab the data from the source system that's required for those individual documents. And actually, it's first thing it's doing is going out to cold storage and waking up our Azure functions. And now it's started the document generation process. And if we go over to the real-time monitor here, we should start seeing messages coming in here from the, unless I've timed out something here. There we go. So now these are calls. So we're creating a destination folder again through the API, the DocuSign API. Other things flew by pretty quickly because we're retrieving everything from the cache because I haven't changed any of the templates. And now we're calling the merge XML task from the DocuSign API. So we are in the middle of merging those processes. This is one of the longer running tasks inside of the whole orchestration process. Merging tags is doing some of our own custom generation. You'll see updating document fields. These are fields that are used by our eDocs platform. We did a bunch of analysis of that document inside of Azure, and now we're uploading it back to CLM. So if we look at, this is 86, so we just click on here, we can go and see what was generated. You'll see that these are the various documents that were generated, content merged in. We didn't look at the actual template here, but these are conditional merge tags based on information that was derived by the business rules as well. One of the challenges, again, to implement the straight-through processing is related to handling errors. You'll see that this particular document is highlighted in red. So if we click on this, if you've done any merging of documents inside CLM, you'll be familiar with this, this guy down here at the bottom, your dreaded yellow box with the red letters in it. So there was an error that occurred inside of the actual merge process. So rather than flow this through to the signing table where an end user can see that we'll be presented with a document that is clearly invalid, we use the API again to validate that the merge the merge was created successfully and the document does not have any of these errors, and otherwise we return that information back to the end user to prevent that from going just out to the desk. And you'll see here a number of the business rules that were executed as part of that. These were some of the earlier ones that drove the execution of subsequent rules. And if we look at the durations here, you can see that in general, the document, there's a little bit of housekeeping that takes place in here. So the overall was about 53 seconds, but 43 seconds of that took place inside the DocGen application itself. Some of this was waking up functions and calling the ETL. And just by document, you can see the merging the XML is, as I mentioned, the long pole in the tent for these document generation processes. The other pieces are fairly quick. But so you can see that the whole end-to-end experience is driven on top of the DocuSign API experience, but let's go back to my application here. It's driven on top of the DocuSign experience. However, it is somewhat shielded from the user. They don't have to go into CLM to get that sort of integrated solution. So some of the lessons that we learned out of doing this is there's a very robust CLM REST API if you haven't looked at it, and pretty much anything you want to do can be done through it. Now, there are, especially if you're trying to create these sort of real-time high volume environments, you need to understand some of the implications of using that shared CLM environment. So there are limitations on the number of concurrent API calls that can be executing at one time. This is a hard limit that is set by DocuSign to prevent people from abusing the environment. There is also a limited number of API calls you can do per time period. Again, that's to secure the overall performance of the environment for all the customers. So what those first two things indicate is if you're going to be developing API-based solutions, you could encounter any of these limitations. You need to focus on building some intelligent retry logic, because you're going to get a 429 error coming back if you're overdoing the number of API calls. And you have to handle that gracefully, because it's not a true error. It's just that you're overusing the resources allocated to you as a tenant, and that you need to basically monitor the number of API calls and number of concurrent API calls to better manage your environment. So that the moral of the story. Moral of the story there is, be a good tenant within that shared environment. We needed to really identify the appropriate platform for each step in the overall process flow. So long-running CLM tasks like the XML merge, those consume a lot of these concurrent API calls, and as you can imagine, as we have more of those customers making those sorts of calls, we had to be aware that there could be times when there's a lot of long-running calls. So some of those smaller ones have to obviously retry them, or if we can move them off into other areas of the system, into other Azure functions for orchestration, we were able to do that. Our initial foray into this, we looked to embed the business logic into custom workflows. Challenge there, it quickly became, as we tried to rationalize those documents down and put the business intelligence into the business document assembly, it became a maintenance challenge, which has led us to using our rules engine to do the externalization of the business rules. But again, because of the nature of the API, once those documents and the attributes of those documents were determined through the rules engine, it's very easy to implement the orchestration of the generation of those documents to the API. And trying to execute, you can execute workflows in parallel, but we had some challenges on the limitations. So as you can imagine, if we have 30 documents we're generating at a time, that's going to overrun our number of concurrent API calls. So we had to use our intelligent retry logic right off the bat, just for a single set of contracts. And there were some challenges using the workflow engine to do that as well. When you're doing throughput and scalability, it's very important to leverage the DocuSign APIs. And finally, a shout out to Pierce Gleason. When we first started off doing this, it was very much a proof of concept to see if we could do that intelligent document assembly and meet those performance guidelines or goals of the customers. And Pierce Gleason from the DocuSign professional services group was sort of instrumental in getting us to this stage. So quick shout out to him. We are coming up on 39 minutes after. Steve, are there any questions that have come in?
There is one. I've answered some of the ones I could, but I don't know the answer to this one. Do you know what the CLM API concurrent call limits are, or where they can find out what those are?
You need to talk to your DocuSign rep. Or concurrent API calls, you can have 20 concurrently executing API calls. That is, at least in the version that we're working with, a hard limit. Number of API calls, 20 concurrently executing API calls. Otherwise, you're going to get a 429 error returned. Okay. API calls per time period, usually at 15 minutes. That is variable, so that is configurable. So, So that is a configurable value that it can be adjusted. I think it's several thousand, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of calls back and forth. So you might think that's a large number in 15 minutes, but you can quickly hit that as well. So again, the retry logic comes into play there.
Okay. That was it. If anybody else has any other questions, they haven't been submitted
I'll go
yet.
very briefly through Forms Integrator. We're going to get played off the stage here. So this is, again, inputting CLM functionality, leveraging third-party forms and portal solutions, which again, allows you to take data from a portal solution and initiate and monitor CLM workflows. So basically using the CLM API, we map the data coming from those eForm fields into CLM document attributes, kick off CLM workflows, and again, provide that real-time monitoring and dashboarding functionality. So integration between the Forms Integrator solution and the eForms platform into the DocuSign CLM API. And as an example here, from just a demo portal, you click on this contract, it brings up a form in a third-party web application. So entering this information, submitting that would pass this into a CLM workflow and go through the whole approval process and running it through the internal and external approvals, and then returning it back, sending a notification to the individual that submitted that request, and optionally putting it into a custom or a customer-specific ECM platform.